Hello, and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co-host, Nathan Rittenhouse.
And I'm your co-host, Cameron McAllister.
Today, I would like to talk about the Freemasons, secret societies, social clubs, and churches. So, small, easy, lighthearted topic. Yeah, maybe in that order. We'll see where this goes. But no, the news article that had caught my mind was some Catholic adjacent publication that was pontificating whether or not Biden violated his Catholic faith yet again by joining a secret society when he was awarded, when he was given an award by, so the Masons were not racially integrated. And so there was a spinoff branch of that. Long story. Anyway, they granted Biden an award. And so the question was, since like joining the Masons is automatic excommunication from the Catholic Church, it was one of those, like, did Biden do it again kind of things. We don't have to run down that whole rabbit trail, but it did remind me, like, oh yeah, I kind of forgot, like, the whole like tension between the church and the Masons and secret societies and that whole thing, like, kind of ebbs and flows and pops up in culture. I think Dan Brown probably is the best advocate of these organizations now through his fiction. But it's something that's out there. I think it's waning in popularity, as along most like social membership clubs are. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that this morning, Cameron.
My first encounter with the Masons, and admittedly, my knowledge is very limited, but was one of the first tiffs my dad got into with his father-in-law. My grandfather was over the Masons. So this must have been the early 80s. And my grandfather was on his way to a meeting at the Masonic Lodge. And I'm not sure what the rules, I'm pretty sure you can't bring an outsider, but for some reason, it seems to me that he wanted to bring my dad along or something maybe like that.
Maybe an initiate gathering. Yeah.
Perhaps. I don't know. But either way, my dad, not only did my dad say, no, thank you. In fact, he didn't say, no, thank you. He said no on no uncertain terms, and then added on no uncertain terms, you yourself ought not to be a part of the Masons. And it turned into this row. He said something along the lines of, I can't believe a son-in-law would speak to me like this. My grandfather had a fiery temper. But all that to say, so in that row, I don't know who won. But in the end, my grandfather went to his grave no longer a Mason.
Ah, so he did not get the little lambskin apron when he got buried.
He did not. And the coffee mug went away too. So
he did no little emblem on the back of the car.
Chalk that up as a victory for dad, I suppose.
Okay, well, so that's a helpful story to lean into this, because I run into such a radical difference of opinion on people who will come up and say, like, well, I'm a Mason and this is an organization that allows me to, affirm a higher power and to be faithful to my wife and ethical in my business. And sometimes we read scripture or, lots of religious sounding stuff. And I don't understand why I can't be a member of XYZ if I'm part of this thing. And then, so I hear that. Then there's like this weird, like, it depends how far into it you are of how religious it is or what the parallels. It doesn't claim to be a Christian organization. It's broadly tolerant of all religions. I think the Catholic Church is the one who most prominently has a hardcore, like, this is anti the Catholic faith and is in total conflict with it. And there's where the excommunication order comes from. But a surprising number, I was actually looking at the list, Cameron, on a really reliable source known as Wikipedia, of all the churches that have an opposing stance. And it's a pretty big list. I mean, a lot that people would recognize: different Lutheran, Nazarene, Mennonite, even Southern Baptist Convention has some statements, Lutheran churches, did I say that? Church of the Brethren, Assemblies of God, Society of Friends, Free Methodist, Seventh-day Adventist, Orthodox Presbyterian, International Baptist Unions, PCA has a little bit of a curious designation there. And so, it's not an off thing. Like, we can be like, oh, the Catholics excommunicate people. No, like, a pretty good percentage of churches have a statement about this. Also, I think I know people who are Masons and part of several of these churches. So, there aren't real tight boundaries drawn on how that works out. But
sure.
Do you know any of the rationale behind your dad's? We could actually ask him this sometime, but like, why did he react so vehemently to your grandfather? Do you know
We
what any of
do
the
need
principles
to
were?
talk to him about it. Well, just speaking out of my ignorance here, the fact that the Catholic Church is so staunchly opposed is news to me. I didn't realize
Okay.
that. So no, I don't. So, and to be honest with you, I don't know too much. I've never looked very deeply into the Masons because it's not really overlapped with my own life beyond my grandfather, and that was
Mm.
that was before I was born. I haven't known anybody who's a card carrying member, or perhaps I have and I just didn't realize it. I mean, basically, the extent of my knowledge, Nathan, is that it's fairly cryptic. It's shrouded in quite a bit of secrecy. I do now have another childhood memory where, look at you. This is you basically. I should be on a couch right now, and you
Well,
should just
back on
start
your couch. Yeah.
psychoanalyzing me. Yes, but I remember being on a walk. This is how. This is how. Look at this. It's like a hypnosis session. Just
It's all
kidding.
coming
But
together. It's called.
now it's coming together. Now I remember the context in which my dad told me that story. We were on a walk in Austria, and you know Austria, like many European countries, is a very walking centric place. There are sidewalks everywhere. You can walk everywhere. So we used to take these long walks at night. One evening down one of the streets in our village, and we passed this somewhat gothic looking house in a normal residential section, and it was a Masonic lodge. And I was interested in the building because it was somewhat gothic looking. It was interesting looking. It had
Mhm.
pointed arches and things like that. Now I know not most Masonic lodges could look like DMVs. I've seen them. This one didn't. And so Dad began to tell me, he said, well, this is a secret society. The deeper in you go, this functions. Basically, if I'm piecing this together correctly, Nathan, it has the function of a cult. And that's the real theological hang up
Yeah.
that people have with it. And you put a very important qualification in place earlier. Many people who are involved have not gone that deep. I mean, this is true of many other kind of secret societies. I mean, there are levels. So
Mhm.
plenty of people probably have a more casual relationship with it. But I've heard a number of warning signs. Derek Prince, whom you may know, was a Cambridge educated theologian who happened to have a very flourishing deliverance ministry. And I know if you say deliverance ministry, you automatically have to give some context. Was he one of these kind of really wacky people? He was not at all. And if you watch Derek Prince, some of you know who he is. If you've watched his talks or read his books, you'll see that it's a very even-handed, very sober-minded, very measured description of how to deal with spiritual oppression. But he said, he was on record as saying several times that he saw very serious demonic activity surrounding the Masons. He said that repeatedly. And he's
So
not alone. So
yeah,
that's about the
I
most
think
I can say.
although let me read something and then throw a little other commentary in here. So if you go to freemason.com or something, you're going to get Freemasonry is one of the oldest fraternal organizations in the world. It unites men of good character who, through different religious, ethnic, or social backgrounds, share a belief in the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of mankind, which sounds like progressive liberal Protestantism, just as a side
It
note there.
does. Yeah, it
Freemasonry
does.
offers a system or blueprint for the good man to further improve his character and action through its system of degrees, symbols, and fellowship opportunities. And so it's that last sentence there that's a little bit of a nod, because I think most people are going to run in. You're going to cross the Masons into somebody who is, or there's a lot of conversation of only the lower level members are the ones who talk about it. It's like Fight Club or something. The that you only run into it really at funerals, I think. So this gets a little awkward if you're a church leader and you're doing, and then there's a whole little extra set of rituals that go along with being buried as a Mason, or if you run across them in business. And this is where I remember as a child getting into some weird stuff with somebody that a family member was helping, who was part of hiring and firing in an organization where it very quickly became obvious that he had stumbled into a Masonic embedded network within one of the state agencies, which basically
Okay.
resulted in like threats against his life if he fired this person from this other cohort of people. And like the threat letters were signed Hiram Abiff. So, there's a biblical reference there to a builder of the in Solomon's time, and is
Mhm.
kind of a key figure in that. And so it functioned, I think, where I grew up as a little bit of an inside sleight of hand of like who gets what jobs, who gets what. It had like a business good old boy internal buddy system to it, that there was
Mhm.
sort of a secret knowledge base of who's who and the opportunities that opened up. And then, I mean, of course, it has like all of the things of it's exclusively male. It doesn't have the greatest track record on a lot of social issues. But then
Sure.
the use of religious symbolism that is kind of Christiany, but oftentimes very
Mhm.
much not, but
Mhm.
also varies from hall to hall, I think is what gives you the wild variance in people's perspective of what it is that they're a part of. But I know for like our church leadership would very heavily counsel people, and we were part of a denomination that said like, no, you can't do that. The
Mhm.
reason being, from the church perspective that I grew up with, was not that we thought like, oh, it's out there avidly militating against the church. It's that like you're swearing a oath, and to the degree to whether that's a blood oath or not depends on the level. You're swearing an oath of allegiance to a secret society that may at times hold you to an allegiance contrary to the purposes of the church. And what does it mean to be a member of a church and have your allegiance to Christ and have your allegiance to a secret society? Seems like a um, an intentional lukewarm allegiance to Christ. So those were some of the
Yeah, so we've named
wrinkles you might run
let's
into.
yeah, so just so the wrinkles we've mentioned so far would be idolatry, also syncretism, the mixing and matching
Well,
of
or the
some
idea that it's about making a good man better.
right
So
and
it
some
is very
Christian
much a you work yourself through the degrees of
mhm.
um,
Using Christian
purification.
symbols, mixing and matching them a little bit, using spiritually ambiguous language. Yes. But then and then also we might say that there's some overlap here with Gnosticism. You have secret knowledge
Hmm.
only available to a select or elite few who have risen through the ranks, so to speak. So in that sense, it's got some I mean, it has some overlap there with scientism as well. Am I saying those two are the same thing? No, not at all. Please don't take that out of context. But just the levels and different. Now, yeah. So I think those are some of the wrinkles
Okay.
worth pointing out here.
Well, let me take the conversation in this direction, if you're willing to go. Is that I think there will be a percentage of people listening to this to be appalled, whose very own grandfathers are perfectly lovely men and are part of the Masonic Lodge, who would say, "Oh, this doesn't have anything to do."
Sure.
Well, like the history of like Christian thought has looked into it pretty deeply, and the people coming out of it said, like, "Yeah, you might want to think twice about that." So I think we are not saying anything new here. We're just saying something that probably hasn't been said out loud explicitly in Christian circles for a while,
For a
and
while.
people kind of
Yeah.
forgot about the tension that's
Hmm.
inherently there. Now, in the flip side of that is why would somebody join? And this I want to broaden it out to kind of social organizations in general, and then we'll take apart, pick at, or look at the virtues of the church in this context. But I think, hey, by and large, let's scroll back 100 years.
Hmm.
You're a banker, you know, or yeah, butcher, baker, candlestick maker, and you're looking for male fellowship and an opportunity to join in something where you had opportunities to do good things in the community. And hey, maybe there was a little bit of feasting together and good camaraderie. And why not? We're craving social interaction with like minded individuals, and we want to do good in the world. So we can add a whole list: Lions Club, Ruritan's, Elk
I was
Lodge.
going to
I
say
mean,
Lions Club. Yep.
the
I
whole,
remember
and
that
I'm
one.
not saying that those are all secret societies, by the way, or
No,
that
no,
you're
no.
drinking blood out of skulls or anything like that. But I'm
Yeah.
just broadening this out to say the recognition within all of those organizations today is we're bleeding members rapidly, and we're not replacing ourselves. And the growth in the institutional nature of these outward
Yeah.
facing socially socially oriented organizations is collapsing. And there's a lot of pontification on why that might be happening, but it is just interesting to know. I think particularly within elements of the church where like, well, the church is losing membership. Not always true everywhere, but there's an element that every institution is
Sure.
losing membership. And so I don't know. Can you comment, Cameron, on kind of that broader? I think this is a Robert Putnam bowling alone
Well, that
2.0
was
kind of thing.
for sure.
Fill
I
us in
mean,
on
well,
the
that's
details there of what that is.
well, I mean, that's the key text to bring up, of course. Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone. When did that come out? I want to say
It's
that
been a
came
bit
out
now.
in the 1990s. I thought so. We can look that up in a second, but that's a book that's only it proved to be very prescient, and it's only gained relevancy as the years have gone by. But part of what he's doing is he's putting on his 2000. Wow, so that's a more recent book than I thought.
Well, it was an essay in 1995 and developed into a book in 2000.
Okay. Oh, that makes sense. So the date I had in mind was 95. Okay, great. Okay. So I'm not crazy. But okay, so 2000 he develops it into a book.
Cameron's not crazy because he can remember the publication date of an essay from 30 years ago. Okay, we'll let that one slide.
He puts his Harvard. So he's at Harvard, I believe, still, but he puts his sociologist hat on and he thinks about what's happening to the changing landscape of America. And part of what I love about sociology is Peter Berger once said, the famous sociologist, he said, "I make my living by reading other people's mail." And I like that, kind of just spying on the regular habits.
Make it a little creepy sounding. Yeah.
It does sound creepy. It does. But sociologists are creepy a little bit. And
you heard it here first. Boo to the Masons and sociologists.
That's right.
From Cameron.
Well, but they work a little bit like writers. Writers, I have in mind fiction writers. When you read a really great fiction, a piece of fiction, you kind of feel like this person's been spying on you. They've been looking over your shoulder.
Can I give you an example of that? Like if you read a great fiction writer who's talking about sitting in a train station and watching the expression on somebody's face,
yep,
one thing: they've sat in a train station and watched expressions on people's faces.
Yes,
like you don't write that descriptively just off the top of your head.
That's right.
Like,
oh no, it's not in a vacuum. I mean, David Foster Wallace called writers a species of oglers, and that's what they are. And sociologists kind of work like that too. They look at broader trends sometimes. But that's what Robert Putnam does. So one seemingly innocuous trend, which is part of what we try to do, I think, Nathan, you and I as thinkers, is to show you as thinkers is to show that there's nothing is neutral. It's not necessarily bad, but there's no technological or cultural development, is neutral. It means something, has implications. So one of the ones that he looks at in Bowling Alone is the loss of the front porch and the appearance of a back deck. That's a monumental social shift. Now, I happen to live in a home with a front porch, which is one of the reasons that's the number one thing that attracted me to this house. That was my biggest, I'm very grateful that we have a home. That was my biggest, I guess, the feature I wanted more than anything else. And so that's because it's kind of unusual now. We had to do quite a bit of looking for that because
so you're out there facing the community. Is that the idea?
You are. Yeah, the idea is you're facing the community. So the front porch used to be a place where people had access to you, but also people would have sometimes, sweet tea or lemonade. They would have it on their porch in the spring and in the summer, and people would you would talk to them, or they would come up and join you on the porch and you'd sit together. The back deck, though, of course, doesn't give you that access. It's now a privatized space where you are kind of secured from the public, so to speak, and from your neighbors and fellow citizens. And so the people you have on your back deck are people who are they're your guests. Mm-hmm. You've chosen them. They're exclusive. It's not just some, dork who walks up on your porch. So that's a big shift. And so you have an overwhelming trend now where people, they're not joining the clubs as much anymore. I mean, my grandfather, I remember the Lions Club coffee mugs in their house and all of that. He was part of all of these societies, the bowling leagues, all of that. And part of what Robert Putnam is saying is, now we've veered away from the Masons a little bit, so let's just bracket that for a second. Part of what Putnam is saying in this book is that this is not a good thing. This is not a good development because it's leading to greater levels of social isolation and alienation. And now it'd be worth looking up some recent stuff from Putnam now, especially post 2020 with COVID mm-hmm. and what happened there in the wake of those lockdowns.
See. Whoa, hang on. I have a thought here. This is totally anecdotal and speculative, but I think the lockdowns of COVID were not that different for a significant percentage of our population. I think by 2020,
wow, that's a hot take. Because everybody says the opposite, so I want to hear.
No, I think we already had a pretty significant population in our country who was cloistering themselves from the vast majority of social activity and living online.
We did.
So, obviously COVID accelerated it, but I think
would you say that's younger people? That was younger people predominantly who are in that category?
So. Yeah.
Okay.
But
Yeah,
so
no, I
here's
think that makes sense.
so
Yeah.
here's the difference then is like if you think the difference between 95 and 2025 is that we now have the ability to import our entertainment electronically. So
Sure.
think about your grandfather. He has no computer, no internet, probably not even an answering machine. He might subscribe to some publications, but if he wants social interaction, he's going to have to open up the door of his house and leave it and go to the place
And
where other people seeking social interaction.
and also, if he wants to buy insurance, if he wants to retile his roof, if he wants somebody to work on his lawn, he has to go talk to somebody.
Yeah.
I mean, these things that we all take for granted, they're at our fingertips now. They
What
were
world was
not.
that? So,
This
well,
was a
okay, so
different
this
world.
this
Yeah.
this is what I think is important about this though is that the changing nature of what does it mean to do good. So, it used to be I think denominations even function like this. So, let's say that my denomination or that my local church wanted to drill a well in Africa. Then you go to your denomination, you talk to your denominational representatives who have people stationed in another part of the world in order to carry out that work. Now, I guarantee anybody listening to this could in 90 seconds find a website and make a donation to drill a well in Africa. Like the whole
Yeah.
relational supply chain of access of how do you get something done. You can, I bet you can find a roofer without ever talking to him. Like that,
Yep.
that whole human interaction network is gone. So I'm not celebrating that at all when I say, oh, like social organizations that are trying to do good. It's also indicative, I think, of the fact that our idea of doing good has changed to not like actually going out and getting a shovel or I see the Lions Club, the Virgins Club out there with their little neon jerseys on along the road, picking up trash or,
Sure.
helping out at school fairs and all that kind of stuff. That's like, and their average age is, we won't speculate there, but they're people doing physical work in an actual community, not
For the
like
community,
virtue signaling online that I'm doing good because I voted for the right person or because I'm for this cause or I wear this right, correct pin on my.
It's actual service. Yeah.
It's actual. So I think the taking the concept of good work into the digital space, the importing of our social interactions into the digital space, which then means you don't have to be physically proximate to anybody who shares your same interest, all plays into this collapse that we're seeing in social organizations.
Well, it's also there's the phrase "the air we breathe" or just the way things are done around here, or if you're a fish in water, how do you see the water? All of that applies here because the whole quality of existence now is completely different. You can still do all those things, but now you have to very intentionally do it and it takes extra effort and you have to really think about it and you have to really plan it. In a world where you didn't have instant access to everything that we just mentioned, all the amenities at your fingertips, you had to do some of this stuff. You had to get out there and talk to people. You had to go to a restaurant to get your food. You couldn't get somebody
back in the day.
You couldn't pay somebody to just leave it on your front doorstep. Right. You had to do stuff. Well, now you really don't. Now, all of that, you still can join a bowling league. You can still join the Lions Club. I mean, you can do these things. You can get out there and do some voluntary community service.
Hang on. Do you think, Cameron, that a little bit of, because I'm thinking of types of clubs that are known to be growing, running clubs, and I wonder if the gym isn't functioning in a little bit of this way now, also as
I think so.
As like we think of it as personal fitness, but there's a pretty big social component as well.
Yeah, well, so yeah, I can speak a little
martial
bit
arts, stick martial arts in there, or
absolutely
music lessons,
yes.
Athletic, anything athletic, soccer clubs, whatever.
Yeah, so I mean, those are all endeavors where you are gaining access to a community for better or for worse, and you really are. So yes, those can take that place. Now, even there are those who. So, for instance, in the gym world, you can do online. You can do online sessions with a trainer and all of that. But everybody, all the trainers I know, all the people who are avid gym goers will tell you there's really no substitute for walking through the door into the actual establishment. Why? Because there's
for the smell, the aroma, I think, is one of the main.
Yes, absolutely. For the perspiration everywhere is what you need, and soggy carpets. No, but also people. I mean, it's just call it the spiritual or the magic of human interaction, where you're face to face. There's no substitute for that. But also, you have you have a community. So with the community, you have friendships, but you also have accountability. You can do all of these things on your own terms if it's from a safe online distance. When you're in person, you lose that luxury, and that's a good luxury to lose because you can rationalize your way out of hard work in any endeavor. It's not just limited to the gym, of course.
Okay.
So, and let's throw book clubs in there too, Nathan. I think book clubs are doing decently well these days. Yeah, I know a number of book clubs. I've been a part of a book club not too long ago, and we met a decent amount.
Did you meet online, or did you like?
No. Oh no.
Yeah.
No.
And like
our
snacks,
rule was
right? You want food involved.
Yeah. Yeah. We usually snacks and hang around and usually have a bonfire or something like that. So there are still those, but again, this takes you make a concerted effort for this in a way that you didn't have to earlier. It takes a little bit more work to do this. I do also think that there's a growing recognition of the need. So I think if you mentioned some of Putnam's observations in Bowling Alone, I think probably 7 out of 10 people would nod their heads vigorously and say, "Oh, absolutely, no, he's totally right. Yes, no, this isn't good. We do need to be more active. We do need to participate in more actual acts of service rather than just online virtue signaling." I think there would be broad recognition of that. It's not like he's making a controversial point here and everybody would say, no, I prefer the back deck. Yeah. To heck with those front porches. I don't like my neighbor.
Well, or like I'm so exhausted from dealing with people all day that when I get home, the last thing I want to do is deal with people. Let's talk about church as a
Sure.
This hurts to say it this way. Let's talk about it as a social organization, because social
club. Just kidding.
Social club. It sounds weird to say that way, but like
it makes Nathan unhappy to say that. Yeah.
I'm literally squirming in my seat. So let me lay out 2 prongs here, and then we'll get back on the right track at the end. So I think there's one part of this where we look at church as very much about proper worship and the glory of God, and equipping the saints for ministry, where I go there to remind myself.
Yeah. But be reminded coffee.
So that's the point. And so I go there to remember who God is, to realign myself with reality, and to be equipped and shaped and formed to grow in Christ likeness and to serve him and the world the rest of the week. So it's it's kind of like the little, I don't know, you put the Matchbox car back in the thing and pull the rubber band back and push the button, you're ready to go for another week. So there's that going on. But then if you look at a lot of the modern sociological commentary, even for people who aren't Christians, they will decry the loss of church attendance because they would see it as a socially cohesive in a way in which communities are bound together. And so they're talking about the church as if it is a social function that is a necessary component of doing life together in a physically rooted geographic place. And as much as I want to dismiss that as like, well, the church is not just that, it would be dumb to not recognize that the church actually is that. Like, it's way more than that, but it's not less than that. And so say something clearly to summarize what I just said that doesn't make me sound like a lunatic or a heretic.
Well, no, I like that. So the church includes those vital social elements, but it's not limited to them. So it is that, but it's also more than that. So, but I think this goes to some of a lot of the ways we're wrestling with Christianity today in our culture as it's in decline. So Christianity, if we're just if we're just ruthlessly looking at statistics and things like that, Christianity is in decline, has been in decline in North America for a while, and wrestling with that. So one of the things that we keep coming back to are the social advantages of Christianity. And yes, if you want to make devout, committed Christians who have this is their whole life, squirm in their seats, talk about social advantages of Christianity, because immediately, your kind of alarm bells go off because you think, well, no, we're not Christians because of its social advantages. No, but those social advantages can function, I think, as powerful clues about the efficacy of Christianity. We want to be careful there too, because I think, Nathan, you and we've talked about this a number of times when you get into the whole civilizational conversation about Christianity. Christianity is good for civilization. We need it. because it's the cornerstone of Western civilization. And we're losing the West right now. So if we want to recover the West and crush the enemies of the West, we need Christian civilization. We need Christian empires. So Nathan and I are very skittish about that conversation. But what we would say, I think, what I could at least would say comfortably, is that if Christianity provides you in its healthy instantiations, if it provides you with a type of community where fallen people nevertheless work together and can flourish together, that does function as a clue about its efficacy, because Christians, it would seem, then have a correct anthropology. They're not idealists. They know that I always loved Stanley Hauerwas's way of putting this when people look at other Christians and they would say, man, these people hate each other, but they stay together. So I love that. It's overstated, as is typical with Hauerwas. He gets you thinking, but he's crushing the sentimentalism that so often clouds our vision when we think about. I think idealism kills a lot of good church going, and so that's and so that's very helpful to hear it put like that. I think that for me has been a very helpful quote. But so those social advantages are real. So a healthy church, in other words, Nathan, is the type of institution that, were it to go away, it would be a loss to the community.
Yeah.
Now, I could say that with full confidence about your church, Nathan. If your church closed its doors, your
loss to me.
Town would, it would be a loss to you, but your town would be in practical trouble. It would. Your church is doing. It would feel it. If my church closed, Lawrenceville, where I live, would feel it. It would be a severe impact. People would be left reeling, because the church does so much hands-on good.
And I think a lot of that is just unpublished too, that most people wouldn't recognize.
Most of it's unpublished.
How many tens of thousands of dollars go to what behind-the-scene programming in the community?
And here's something that will maybe push some other people. I mean, the mega church right up the street from me, I'm not going to name it, if it closed its doors, Gwinnett County would really feel it. Mm-hmm. Also, a lot of really good unspoken stuff that they just do. They're just out there doing good stuff. That's
Can
real.
I say something about the integration here? Because I'm part of a men's prayer meeting Saturday mornings. It means I have to leave the house at 6:30, drop my daughter off for a discipleship thing she's part of, and I go to the men's group. And to hang out with 15 or 20 guys who are at all different phases of life, who have big questions, who are discussing and trying to figure out how to live well as Christians, and keep an eye out for what needs to be happening in the community that week, and ask their questions and pray together. Probably one of the most influential things I do on a repeated basis. But then also, church is not just, so maybe you went to the social club because that's where you met your banker and your builder and your the person who sold you eggs. Church does have a very, in most contexts, the church is the most ethnically and socioeconomically diverse gathering in most communities. And so I need to go. I think it's fun to go to a place with people who speak different languages as their first language, who have wildly different careers or life experiences, or grew up in different states and have different skill sets. That's really healthy for me, not to isolate myself into a group that is selected by a very small parameter of commonalities. So there's nothing wrong with the soccer club. It just means that everybody in that club has to be good at soccer, and not everybody in your church has to be good at soccer. And so there's kind of some beauty to that expansiveness. But I was working on a talk. I don't remember, years ago, Cameron, I gave a talk down in Atlanta called "Is Environmental Justice Possible?" And it's a long talk, but I think it's still on YouTube out there floating around.
Oh, it's there.
I was talking about so I had jotted down right before that talk a list of the conversations that I had gotten into after church. And I just found these notes. So after church this is one Sunday, I got in a conversation about theories of the atonement, wheat germination rates, and the possibility of vacuum seeding crimson clover seed, text critical issues in Matthew 17, proper lettuce plant seeding and spacing, art in the Vatican, the number of drones in a healthy beehive, and the unforgivable sin as a state of being, composting, and the upcoming church book club. And so how would you categorize those conversations? Spiritual, practical, eclectic, but if you're going
some of
to
them
church
are West Virginia centric,
but I had quite. But I'm not making this up. I frequently think, here's something that I don't know. When I get to church, I'm going to ask so and so about this. And so the church becomes
Yes. Yeah. Same.
a library of practical lived wisdom and knowledge of people that I'm not in
That's
digital contact with, that have done something for 50 years longer than I've been alive, that it would be
that's a
dumb
good
for
point.
me not to take advantage of what they know, as it relates to fill in the blank. And so I think there's this, the old joke about like the little boy in Sunday school, and the teacher's like, what's gray and furry and runs up a tree and has a long tail. And he's like, well, it sounds like a
Yeah.
squirrel, but I better say Jesus. Like, so
Yeah.
everything that happens in the church doesn't have to have the word Jesus in it in order for us to understand the way in which our Christian faith touches all the components of our lives. And I was
Yep.
blessed a few years back to overheard somebody at church say, "Hey, are you still a part of the Lions Club?" And he's like, "No, I just got so busy with stuff at church that I didn't have time for that anymore." And I thought,
Yeah.
that's an interesting parallel of like, how do we invest our service and our time and our energy? And for him, the church was a substitute for that. It had I think, a bigger moral vision and a more comprehensive nature to what it was trying to do, but still allowed and provided for those opportunities. So, what am I trying to say here? The church is about worshiping the Lord in spirit and truth. It's about growing in Christ likeness, but that growth in Christ likeness is a communal exercise and touches all parts of our lives. And it'd be a shame if we weren't part of fellowships that didn't help us grow in the complex ways in what it means to be human in our time.
I mean, that is the nature of corporate worship. But it's also, I think, as you pointed out, Nathan, your church is also going to be highly specific, because this is why it can't be an online experience. Let's not go down that whole road, and because that's a whole separate podcast and conversation. But just to say, your local gathering of people with whom you are walking side by side as Christian men and women, that's not an expendable feature. That's part of church. So part of church is local church for you and for each of us. We all belong to a local congregation, and that library of practical wisdom, as you said, Nathan, that eclectic group of people, those souls who you're walking side by side with, that is your particular context. And that's a vital part of it. And so the vibrant social dynamics of that are a beautiful part of it. They're interwoven with your corporate worship of the Lord. So it's absolutely necessary. It's beautiful. It is the antidote to loneliness and alienation. It's not perfect. Are there people who feel sidelined and overlooked in churches? Of course. That's part of human life. But yeah.
I love the Os Guinness quote: everybody wants to be part of a community until they recognize there are other people in it.
Right. Yeah.
And so, I mean, I think, Cameron, you probably have one of the most faithful gym attendance records of anybody that I know. I bet there are mornings you don't feel like going.
Of course. I mean, this
And
is
so
true of any pursuit, right?
any pursuit that is good for
Yeah.
you, whether it's piano, jujitsu, juggling. I mean, there are times in which the
unicycle,
discipline
Nathan.
of unicycle. We talk about unicycling at church also. In fact, there was a unicycle in our church Christmas program this year, I think. But I totally lost my train of thought when we got to unicycles.
Well, doing something when you don't feel like it, going when you, I mean, overcoming. There's doing something that's good for you because.
So being uncomfortable at church is not a bug; it's a feature.
Right. Yeah.
It's supposed to be socially awkward, and
I mean,
and to jar you out of what you would rather be doing.
Well, growth is always uncomfortable in any of its shapes and forms. Spiritual growth is no exception. And so, and if you're in a healthy church, you're in a church that will also challenge you, and you're in a church that will also in which you will feel conviction, the conviction of the Holy Spirit, and it's not always comfortable.
I would just point out here, I keep thinking of one more thing. Sorry, you can wrap us up after this. I'll stop talking. It's interesting to me, Cameron, that the churches that are growing are the churches that expect the most from their members.
Yeah. There is a general principle there that, if something actually makes real demands of you, and you begin to catch wind of the fact that it's bigger than you are, whatever it is that's the vision holding this thing together, whether you're talking about AA, And AA is now so spiritually kind of neutered. It's very ambiguous. It used to be very explicitly Christian. Now it's you have to acknowledge your higher power, whatever that is. But it used to be you would basically it was prayer was the foundation of it. But it works to an extent because the participants recognize that if they're healthy participants and if they've come to their senses, they recognize that they can't do it on their own, and they recognize that their own reasoning, their best thinking, their best everything has only gotten them to where they are, and they're hopeless addicts without acknowledging something bigger than themselves. That's not dissimilar from the church. This is Dallas Willard always drew these comparisons because you are gatherings of recovering sinners in active recovery, and something bigger is afoot. And if you recognize that you're a recovering sinner, then you know demands need to be made of you because you have to grow. Now, is that workspace? Is that legalism? No, it means you're growing in spiritual maturity. You're growing closer to your Lord.
But that is something, the forgiveness of sin is not something the Freemasons can offer you. Nor a social club, be as good as they might be. And so I'm not like jumping on the head of social organization, social activity, and picking up trash along the roads and donating to scholarships, all that. Fine, wonderful. Well, let's recognize that the problems of humanity are bigger than that. And that's where the church can uniquely play a special role.
We shall wrap it up there. More can be said as always. And Nathan, if somebody, a listener, has not yet joined TOL Connect, where they can continue the conversation, how might they do so?
TOLtogether.com. Click on the Connect tab at the top of the website. It'd be great.
There you go. Join Connect, and you can join other TOL listeners who are, as you might have guessed, a thoughtful bunch, and you can talk back to us.
I'd say we'll find out whether or not we have any Masons in TOL Connect. That might be, we'll see.
Yeah, I think that's a safe bet. But in case you missed it in the midst of all of this, you've been listening to Thinking Out Loud, a podcast where we think out loud about current events and Christian hope.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's TOLtogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.